So we already introduced ourselves, and nice to see you all. So today so I know a lot of you are not new to the learning community at all. And a lot of what we've covered in the past has really been made possible because of students. All of the learning that I know, especially specifically our foundation, all of the DAP alignment work, it sounds like some of you mentioned mapping work in the introduction. So a lot of the work that we're doing really is fueled by student work and labor and power, and we really couldn't get as far as fast without them. The other thing that I love about working with students is their fresh perspectives. We all really get into our industry jargon and silos and all these acronyms, and it's like alphabet soup all the time. And the thing that I love about working with students is that it's continually bringing fresh blood into the organization. And I think it's really important for organizations to be able to, have that perspective at the table on an iterative and ongoing basis. Malaina, do you want to say anything else about the value that you've seen in working with students? And others of you, feel free to chime into the chat. Just tell us, what kind of the value proposition is you see in working with students.
I think students are definitely an untapped resource for organizations. A lot of times we sit and wait for them to reach out to us because we know that they're going to, especially if they're determined to get into post-secondary education. And sometimes we don't think, or we don't want, or we don't have the time to reach out to them. And when we do, and I know in our experience, we realize how valuable their brains are and their work and their thoughts and ideas. And I just really enjoy working with them.
The other thing I will say is that universities are pretty responsive to changing industry trends. So a lot of times we work with students who have expertise that might have not been a field when we were in school. For those of us sitting around the table who've been out of school for a little while, so that's a really good benefit of working with students, is that they might bring particular skill sets to your organization that just doesn't exist there, and you could really work with that. Let me see. Sorry, guys, I can't seem to. There we go. Okay, so we're gonna define some key terms that so in case you hear me use any of these words. So you've all heard the word intern. When I say the word intern, I mean a paid student worker. Sometimes they're getting course credit. Typically they're getting course credits. They're not always getting course credit. Sometimes they're just getting work experience. So, they could really truly be just a short-term, temporary, part-time worker. But when they're a student, we tend to call them an intern. I highly recommend that you pay your interns. I think it's really important to do that, especially for equity reasons that Malaina will discuss in a little bit. And just to practice what you preach. I know we try to pay our students above the minimum wage and try to do the best we can to do a living wage for a single householder in our region. Experiential learners that's kind of a catch-all word for students who you're not paying, who are likely enrolled in a course or an independent study that they're earning course credit for. So whereas the intern students might or might not be meeting a graduation requirement, experiential learners are likely meeting a course requirement, and they're getting a grade. So they are getting something out of the work that is helping them advance their career. I will say that I think it's important to build relationships with the institutions and partnerships with the institutions. And if you don't have those or need advice on those, my one key tip would be that higher ed institutions are extremely Byzantine and bureaucratic. So you might need to have 3 to 5 different contacts at a single institution to get connected with the right student. So for example, you might need to find out who is the internship coordinator in a particular program, or who is their experiential learning officer co-ops director, or at some institutions, they have a standalone office. At some, it's more integrated throughout programs. So if you haven't had luck connecting with the right people before, just be persistent and try calling around and doing some research with the institutions that have the right programs that might be a good partnership for you. Also, individual faculty members, especially for the experiential learning side. You know, if you are working in your community and, you know, I'll give you an example. In our community, we have a food policy council, and Dr. Tom Felke, who sits on that food policy council, is like the go-to connector in our region for all things food access and food security, because he just knows the whole landscape and he has a great cadre of resources. And those faculty partnerships are really, really beneficial, because then you're not going it alone working with the students. You have just another person mentoring them and helping them. Service learners is an academic word for what we would call non-academia as like a volunteer. But it's more than volunteering, because when you think of volunteering, you think of just, I show up and I, you know, pick up trash, right? And that's it. But service learning is connecting students to some sort of learning objectives. So they're not just going and picking up trash. Maybe they're learning something about marine ecosystems and how they're impacted by trash, right? So they're connecting something back and reflecting back on what they're doing, so that they're attaining some learning outcomes. So it's a little bit, it's not quite volunteering, although I think if people who are non-academic would think of service learners as volunteers. Fellows, so Allie mentioned that Central Florida is working with fellows, and she mentioned that they're master and PhD level students. So oftentimes fellows are students with a bit more experience than undergraduate work. There's even postdoctoral fellows. There's fellows in the field at different think tanks and institutions who have a plethora of experience. You know, sometimes a fellow could have 30 years of research experience and get a fellowship. So there's all sorts of different ways to do that. Another one that I just want to talk about in case you're unfamiliar with it is AmeriCorps Vista. So this is a program kind of like the Peace Corps, but right here in the United States, where students do a year of service with AmeriCorps. Collaboratory is actually going to be getting its first AmeriCorps Vista in a couple of months. We're really excited about that. And we were able to accomplish that by working with our regional planning coalition, our regional planning council. And so to be an AmeriCorps site, it's kind of like receiving a grant award, because you're receiving a person who's going to do service with your organization for a year, and your project could be up to 3 years long. And so, you know, just like applying for a grant could be a lot, it's often easier to forge a partnership. So we forged a partnership with an organization that is mission aligned to our organization. They are interested in sustainable development in our region, just like we are interested in sustainable development. And they already had an AmeriCorps program. So instead of applying from scratch to be our own unique site, we joined onto their program and became a sub-site of theirs. And that's extremely beneficial, because again, we have coordinated goals. It's deepening our relationship with that organization who we're mission aligned to. And it will provide those students with the opportunity to be in a bit of a cohort setting, where they will get to learn alongside peers who are working on other projects outside of our organization in the region, so that we could start to understand just different synergistic relationships between different sustainability outcomes. So for example, while our Vista will be serving at Collaboratory, there are other Vistas who started an opioid task force in our region. The Food Policy Council that I mentioned was started by an AmeriCorps Vista. So they do really high impact projects. And if you already have a program at a sister institution or somewhere in your region, it might not be that much work for you to partner with them. So I wanted to just bring that up. Any questions about those key terms? I'm not monitoring the chat. Malaina, what are people saying in the chat?
There's someone who has entered paid by their local career source. So that's awesome.
Oh, that is awesome. I want to hear more about that, Sandy, in a bit. So we'll come back to that. So these are the kind of like, you know, we all have budgets that we have to work within, and we all have limited resources. And so internships and service experiences for students are really great ways to maximize our impact without killing our budgets. And interns provide a great value. So I definitely want to hear about that. That's really cool. Next slide. Okay, so another thing, and this is really important if you do go the AmeriCorps route for when you're building your program, AmeriCorps is very specific on that your VISTA members who serve at your site focus on capacity building and not direct service. And that's pretty easy for community foundations typically because we're not direct service organizations to begin with. But you just want to be a little bit careful. Like you wouldn't want an AmeriCorps student or an AmeriCorps VISTA member. I don't even want to say student because they're technically not always students. They could be adults with a lot of experience too. They typically need to focus on capacity building. So where you might have them develop a database of your grantees or enhance some of your information systems, that's building your organizational capacity. It wouldn't be appropriate for them to manage a grant program per se, because that's your grant maker's responsibility. So they shouldn't be doing things that are really the full-time responsibility of employees. They should be enhancing organizational capacity or community capacity in some way, shape, or form. So things like increasing fundraising, applying for grants, so bringing more capital in is an example of capacity building versus that direct service, which it's pretty hard. Like I said, community foundations don't struggle with that as much as direct service organizations anyway, but still there's just a few things to be aware of there. I would also say that it sounds like a lot of you use interns for project-specific tasks or capacity building already. And I think that's a really good model. We do have a handful of interns for things like events where they're more like a part-time worker than they are working on a project. And there's no right or wrong way to use student work. But for the SDG work, I find that capacity building projects and specific projects that are scoped out with very specific objectives tends to be the way to go. All right, and I'm going to turn it over to Malaina.
Awesome. So considering equity in your recruitment and onboarding, equity is definitely a word that we hear a lot nowadays. And I want to just mention a little bit of what we learned at our foundation around equity and recruiting and onboarding interns specifically, but also it could relate to any type of application building. So first and foremost, when you are recruiting interns, it's important to think about where you are going to recruit them. I can still vividly remember the day when we were all sitting where Katie is right now, and we're like, why are all of our interns white? I was like, well, where are we going to find these interns? Okay, well, we're asking people that we know in our professional world, which happens to be a lot of white people. So it's important to consider where you are going to find your interns, especially if you're looking for a more diverse pool, which I hope you are. So definitely tap into your local universities, but not only universities. If you have a community college or a state college in town, go to those state colleges and community colleges too. They also have internship programs and students who are needing credit hours for internships to graduate and get their degrees. Also, technical schools in your area. Some programs there may require students to do some type of on-site learning or internship, and their skills may be valuable to you. So if you're looking for something that a trades person would definitely have expertise in, don't hesitate to reach out to those areas, specifically around event management and things like that. If you have a building that uses those type of people, definitely tap into technical colleges and search for internships or interns there as well. Also online, so if you're posting online, definitely don't undermine the power of social media nowadays. Boosted posts in your area could be $25-30 and can get you a lot of diverse internship applications to your organization. Also, if you know of any influencers in your area, so if you have students that are in your area, especially Orlando, there's a lot of influencers that live there, and you can ask them just to share your internship opportunity on their story or on their feed, and they'll charge you maybe, or maybe they won't, and they'll just share it with their followers, and that can definitely get you a broad, very diverse pool of applicants as well. When it comes to the actual application, I know this is going to sound like very basic, but trust me, it's not. Just making identification questions, multi-select, especially when it comes to race. A lot of people aren't a single race anymore, and identify in multiple ways. Also, not having a identification such as other, because that can definitely stop a person from applying or make them feel insufficient. So you can look up all of the ways that people identify when it comes to their race and ethnicity and include those on your application and make it multi-select. Also with gender identification as well. Make sure you have all of the gender identification options on your application for students to use in identifying themselves. And also look at the way that you're asking a person, instead of what is your race or what is your gender, how do you identify is definitely more suitable for a person, especially when you're considering equity. Something else to also think about is the number of questions you have on your application. Students are not the traditional student that you think of anymore. They have jobs. Sometimes they have multiple jobs. Sometimes they are having a job and then, they host at a restaurant and then they walk people's dogs or they babysit. They have class in their course schedule because they have to take 15 credit hours this semester to graduate on time. There's a lot of reasons and whys. So if you make your application super duper long, the chances of a person or a non-traditional student, the student that you would want applying for your internship will go down because they just don't have the time to sit there and complete that application. Same goes for asking for a resume. A lot of students nowadays don't have resumes. They aren't given the opportunities to build resumes when they're in high school. They don't know where to start, or the resume itself intimidates them to a point where they just don't do it. So if there's anything that you would look for on a resume, ask it in the application, and maybe during the interview process or when you onboard them, ask them about ways that you can help them build that resume or give them the resources, because students nowadays just don't have resumes, and that can stop a student from applying for an internship, is if you are asking them, even if it's optional, because they'll feel like, well, other students are going to upload their resume, so I don't have a chance, and they're just not going to apply. So that's definitely something else to consider. Also, qualifications. So using language like bachelor's degree okay, master's degree preferred. That language can stop a student from applying, especially a Black and brown student from applying for an internship. If you don't mind if they have a bachelor's degree, then just have the qualification a bachelor's degree. If you need a master's degree, then have the qualification be a master's degree. The preferred language in that can definitely stop a Black or brown person from applying because they feel like their chances would be limited just based off of that qualification. It doesn't come to mind that to still apply because, it could definitely just stop them from applying. And we've experienced that in a lot of different ways in our organization and our community locally. I can go on and on about equity. So it happens to be something that I'm very interested and passionate about, but I think that just when it comes to students and internships, allowing the student to take a driver's seat or just invite them into the passenger seat even, and consider their needs before your own, it will definitely help in establishing that trust and creating an internship program that your organization, that students will seek out. And that'll be the goal, right? Students will be coming to you, and every student will want to intern there, and they'll learn so much, and it'll just create a better relationship with your community in general.
Great. And it looks like Allie was asking if we have a application. I know. So we actually were working to embed equity into our process a little bit better because, like Malaina said, we were like, scratch your heads. We're like, why are all of our interns white? And they were like, oh yeah, we're finding them in network. We're not really recruiting them. They're just kind of showing up. And so obviously the students who are showing up are the ones who have well-to-do parents in town, essentially, because who knows about community foundations, donors, and wealthy people, let's be honest, right? So we were working to build that application. I think we have the wireframe, and Malaina, we didn't get it in Kaleidoscope just yet, did we?
Nope.
We could share the template that we over to Kaleidoscope to build it. We're happy to do that. So I could send that to any and anyone on the call. Or if Malaina, if you're good at multitasking and finding that and want to upload it in the files, we could just share that in the chat right now. All right. That was a lot of good information.
I have a question.
Sure.
So thank you so much for going over equity. I think it's so important. Before I was at the Dallas Foundation, I was running an agency in the underserved population, the underserved area of our city. And some of the largest grants that I got in that role as a fundraiser can directly be traced back to the internship that I had at a different community foundation in town. So it really, really does make a difference when we think about how to diversify philanthropy and who has seats at the table and who is, making relationships at these funding organizations. I guess what I'm curious about is now that I'm on this side and I'm at a foundation, do any of your agencies have explicit language that, kind of affirms your own policy about how you will go about hiring interns? Because that comment that, why do all of our interns look the same? Well, if we're hiring the children of our friends or our own children, when they're in high school, you're kind of inherently making sure that philanthropy will continue to look the same. So just curious, do any of you have explicit language to say, this is who we are, and this is what we will and won't do? And I understand, kind of getting in your own way is an issue, but how are we making sure that what we say and what we do are aligned?
I love that question so much. Oh my gosh. Yes. Anyone else want to answer? We are currently working on that.
We are working on it. We're not doing good enough, and we're working to improve it. So that's where a lot of this started. And, I know with our employee recruitment, sometimes we use firms, and we work with those, hiring firms because they're experts in helping us build equity into those processes. But for an internship, we're not using a firm, so we need to be able to build it ourselves in-house, right?
And are you prepared to stand behind what you're saying? If the right donor asks, will you go ahead and give their child an internship, knowing good and well they'll be fine without it?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, but just, is that something your agency has thought about? Because I'm confronted with that now.
I would say for us, sorry. For us, it's something that we're definitely thinking about and trying to figure out how do we implement that throughout everything we do. So anything from hiring people to how we do grants. And I just put in the chat, Artisha, I had put a message in at Peak Grant Making because we're looking at changing some of our grant processes. And so if you're interested in joining a cohort to talk about equity and grant making, you can just email her and she'll invite you to the May 27th meeting. But I think it's challenging. We're working on a couple of projects. One is increasing equity in boards and increasing the diversity, but we're looking at it from the standpoint of how do we actually change the culture of the nonprofit board and the nonprofit versus actually saying Black people need leadership training. Because as we went through the focus groups and all of the different things that we needed to get to where we are, we heard over and over again what people don't need. The other thing, like for me, I'm always the bright white girl in the crowd. And so what I want to do is make sure that I'm surrounded by voices of people who have different experience than I do, have different lived experience. And so, as we talk about recruiting, I can say to a fund holder, we may not have an opportunity for your child here right now, but here's X nonprofits that we could share with you, so that I'm always trying to make sure that there's an alternative. Because, we're in a position right now where the pendulum has switched to, has shifted is the right word. And so people are concerned about, well, what about me? What about my kids? And so that's probably what you're experiencing a little bit of. And I think we just need to calm those fears to say, equity is really making up for the mistakes of the past, but we've inherited those. And so we need to be part of that solution. So it doesn't mean you can't have any white people work with you. It just means that you have to open the doors and be balanced in what you're doing. And you may have to take additional steps because, like Malaina, you mentioned, um, somebody may not have a resume. And so, you have to think about, can I change my application process to make it easier or more equitable for people rather than just thinking, if I drop the resume, then I may not get qualified applicants because qualified is in the eyes of the beholder. Like I have somebody right now that is my intern for from Career Source, and she's fabulous. But when I got her resume, I mean, I didn't know what race she was or anything else. I immediately, Allie and I both turned it down because we're like, she doesn't have any experience. She's got an arts degree. She's not, doesn't have anything on her
She's a graphic
resume.
designer.
Yeah, that shows that she could do this highly administrative, very detail oriented job that we had. And, they kicked back and said, you need to give her a try. And we did. And she's fabulous. So, I had to reframe my thinking. And so did Allie around, somebody may have started in one direction, but has the ability to do something else.
There's a lot of students with transferable skills, and Malaina always is so good at reminding me, like, hello, they're coming here to get experience. Duh, they don't have the experience yet. So just like we build the capacity of our grantees, and we're very good at, walking alongside grantees, all of us, we have to do the same thing with students and interns. And it obviously has to be a mutually beneficial relationship. We want to set them up for success, and it does take a bit of time and investment. I think that's why a lot of foundations, especially small ones like us, it's like, you're sitting there, especially if you're small and you're a one person department, like I know some of you are, and you're like, oh, do I have the time to invest in this? Is this going to be well, what's the payoff? Takes so long to train someone and then they turn over so quickly. So I like that career source relationship because that is, you could probably get a student who might work for you for a couple of years. Another option that we've explored is a lot of institutions have work study students who they could place in the community. And that's really a big win if you could get one of those students placed at your site, because that is a part of their federal aid package. And there's federal money that is not being spent if those students aren't getting work study positions, and they have a hard time finding them. And oh my gosh, the best student worker I ever had was a work study student. He was the best. We still keep in touch. She's gone on to do really great things, So I think, again, it's a lot about those partnerships. It looks like Shelley was sharing in the chat that they're working on it at their institution and shared some resources. That's really, really great. I don't want to rush this because this is so important. Malaina, do you have any other thoughts, or do any of you have other insights or thought on equity into recruitment, onboarding, capacity building, et cetera? We could always weave it back in and come and circle back around, and we will be sure to share that application that Malaina really was her brainchild of, like, she was like, we cannot ask them for resumes, like, especially undergraduate students, like they just don't have them. And that's unacceptable, and same with our AmeriCorps Vista position. We at first were like bachelor's required, and then we're like, why is a bachelor's required? A GED or a high school diploma is perfectly, so sometimes I think, just really, like Sandy said, reframing what you think is possible and giving something a try, and you'll very likely be pleasantly surprised, especially if you are just a good inspirational leader and manager of talent, which I think everyone around this table really is. Okay. So that's perfect segue into project scoping and managing expectations. So we like to, like I said, we use, we have student service learners, all those key terms that I defined. We have a variety of all of those who file in and out. And and Malaina helped us kind of in that application that we'll share, build out some of those kind of ways of funneling people. So thinking about how you're going to funnel people into the buckets based on what their needs are and what your needs are. So how you could play match.com in that application process. And so that way it's not too much work. Think about how a lot of us are moving towards having grantees just answer a few quick questions to see if they qualify and then asking for more information. So really trying to not waste people's time, so trying to improve all of our processes, just like applying like what we're doing to grant making in this, it's totally transferable skills for us as organizations. I would say it's really important to set clear learning objectives and to articulate what the key deliverables will be. But it's also important to be flexible and adaptable, because you might have so you don't want to scope a project out 100%, right? You want to scope it 60 to 80% of the way and let the student, based on what their career goals are and their learning objectives are, help you scope the project, at least 20%, maybe 40 to 60% of the way. So really being clear, but also being flexible simultaneously is really, really important. And also another thing that we're learning is that some students are really comfortable with ambiguity and some students really like a lot of structure. So just consider asking that in your application. How comfortable, what's your level of comfort with ambiguity? No wrong answer, but then you just know it's a better tool so you can just set everyone up for success a lot better. And I think another thing that we learned that's been really good is if at all possible, I mentioned at the beginning that higher ed institutions are often good at, trending needs and, evolving career paths. So there's majors now that didn't exist 5-10 years ago in schools. So if you are having students, like we have user experience students work with us quite a bit from the University of Michigan School of Information. And one of the things that they were able to do with our summer program last year was connect them with a professional in their field. So I don't have the same background as they have. So I couldn't mentor them on certain aspects of their project. So what we did to compensate for that was they had a mentor who was in the field who met with them weekly for like a lunch meeting once a week throughout the summer, because she had over 20 years of experience in their field. She was actually with the institution before the degree program even started. She doesn't technically have a degree in that, but she has the work experience in it. Really interesting situation. So think of creative solutions like that too, because the more kind of support you put around the students, the more likely they'll be to have success. I think the other thing too is onboarding really happens throughout the entire internship. It doesn't like end after the first week. So, and some of the projects we had in our early days is like, because we're new to the internship space, honestly, we haven't been doing it that long. We had some of our early interns put together glossary of terms and come up with like different materials that we could pass on to future interns so that we have a more easier baton pass. And obviously the Council of Foundation has a great glossary for community foundations. We also recently got the CF Express training, because those are really nice modules that it's Svetlana sent it around. I could share it with you all. I think most of you have seen it, but I'm happy to share that again. It's pretty affordable for our institution to purchase for the year, and it's available to all of our board members, all of our staff, all of our interns, and it really helps people who haven't worked in a community foundation before get up to speed on what a community foundation is and does through some quick video modules. And it even has an SDG module, which is a bonus because we're all here on this learning community to talk about the SDGs. So it gives kind of some consistency, and it's not time you have to physically spend with them. It's, a program that you just have the student participate in. So that's it on that. And I'm going to pass it back over to Malaina.
Thanks for that unmute button. So considering students' needs, it's super important. It's kind of like prescribing the change, but in internship style. What organizations usually do is they give them like a syllabus looking format, and that's what they follow week to week. And it's kind of robotic and automated, and it lacks the human touch that a lot of students really need to help them form their goals and aspirations. Because a lot of the times, being honest, just think about, speaking for myself here, how many times you changed your major. Sometimes the students are still figuring it out. And if it becomes autonomous or like they feel like they're just following the motions, they're going to be the ones later on down the road going back to school and wasting a whole bunch of money because they studied something that they didn't really love and wasn't given the opportunity to kind of figure that out. So what Katie said earlier about like the 60% and letting the student kind of help you design the rest of the internship and how it progresses is definitely crucial. Especially in the long-term relationship building with the student and with the school, arguably. So maybe in the interview process or during the onboarding process, having an open conversation about what the student needs are, asking them, what are they hoping to gain out of this internship? What skills are they hoping to gain out of this internship? One of the things is Excel, I hope, because I don't know about you guys, but I didn't learn how to use Excel until I became a professional. And a lot of minority students, that's the boat that they end up being in. So asking them, what are your needs? What can I do? What softwares do you want to learn about? Are you wanting to learn about this? Are you wanting to see this side of the nonprofit? Hooking them up with other people around your organization during the onboarding process, having the intern have one-on-ones with different department leads or the entire department, maybe for an hour, 30 minutes lunch, just so the student can really learn about other aspects of the organization and really see how it works. Also inviting them to internal meetings. So even if the meeting isn't about what the student is working on, I know Katie and I, we all just invited our internships to our budget meeting. So when we got together and we're talking out loud about programs that we're budgeting for, inviting the interns to that so they can kind of hear, engage, and making it optional. And they came because they were super interested in seeing this process. Just inviting them, if you have team calls on a weekly or monthly or daily basis, I don't know, invite your interns to those so they can listen in and kind of see how the organization works. Also offering them volunteer hours for participation in certain programs. So maybe a different program in your organization is doing something like we have conversations about implicit bias and structural racism on a monthly basis. Inviting your interns to those. We invite our interns, I invite scholarship recipients and offer volunteer hours because they're contributing to the conversation about structural racism and implicit bias. And volunteer hours can sometimes be a degree requirement at some universities. So considering that as well. Offering them resume building. So I know one intern we had, Katie talked about her resume with her on a weekly, daily basis, always updating word choice, all of those things that can really help that student because your name is going to be on their resume now. So you want that resume to look good and sound good. Also, allowing them flexibility around their course schedule. So maybe not having a rigid set of hours that they work on a weekly basis, allowing them some flexibility. If they can work at night on certain projects, allowing them to work during the evening hours when you're not necessarily available, but that's just when they are available. So allowing them to do that will be very, very helpful and beneficial. But I really just want to harp on just asking the student because the student knows best. They know what they need. They know what their requirements are. If they're looking for course credit, ask them questions about the course so you can have a better understanding of what it is that they're studying and what they need. If they have their professor's contact information, get in touch with that professor so you can have a relationship with them. So in future projects, maybe you need a student, you don't have any interns available, you can email that professor and say, hey, this is what I have. Do you have a student that would be good to help me out with this? And then boom, you have a relationship there. So yeah, I'm gonna stop there because we're running short on time and I'll get long-winded, but definitely just ask the student.
Those are great points, Malaina. And I like that you noticed that. So another thing is like, help them see the why, so a lot of times what I do with interns is, because sometimes they're doing work that's like tedious, so help them see the bigger why. And, tell them, like, I'll say to them, I'll be like, you're going to be able to write on your resume XYZ. Like, you're going to be able to say that you mapped the nonprofit sector in Southwest Florida. Like, I know this work feels tedious and I know you're working your butt off, but like, that is a big thing. Like, so help them understand what the big thing is that their work is contributing that you absolutely could not do without them. And that they get really excited about that because, they're busy, they have so much on their plates. And for them to hear that, like we've noticed that they've really enjoyed that. The other feedback we've gotten is they like having, especially in the virtual world that we're in, they like having a little bit of unstructured time. So we meet weekly for, it's called lunch and shenanigans. Like it's not a meeting, it's totally optional. And some of the people who've interned with us in the past like still pop in for that because they enjoyed it so much. So giving, especially right now in the virtual age, giving students that opportunity just to connect human to human and build relationships with each other, because they're building their network, and that's a big part of what an internship experience offers people. Okay, so we are going along, and so I'm going to take us to our last slide. I'm glad we were able to embed a little bit of conversation into this. So I'm sorry if it seemed too one-sided. Please keep the comments coming in the chat. So this is the last slide that I will share with you. This really helped me understand what students were going through. So this is adapted from Schweitzer and King's The Successful Internship. So when students are getting started, when they're being recruited or onboarded, their common concerns are anticipation. So they're trying to figure out what's their role, what's the workload, what are the expectations, what's the culture, all of that. They're trying to figure out what their supervisor style is. They're worried about if they're going to fit in or not. If they're working with clients or nonprofits or whoever they might be working on, they're worried about that. They're worried about a lot of things. It's kind of stressful for a lot of them. So some of their emotions might be eagerness, excitement, or anxiety. Then they kind of move into the exploration phase. So they're starting to maybe wonder if they're adequate, if they're doing a good job. They're wondering if they're communicating effectively. We notice this a lot, they always feel like they're bothering people. So the more you could go out of your way to make it clear that they are helping you and not a bother to you at all, the more successful it'll be, because it's better to have them ask the question than for them to think about it and stress about it for an hour, and then this is where they often get imposter syndrome. Their confidence is up and down. They might be confused or frustrated. And then they start to reach the competence level. They're getting into the groove. They're growing professionally. They're feeling good. They're feeling like they're on track to meet their learning objectives. And at this point, they might be thinking, like, am I being micromanaged, or do I need more guidance? Those are kind of good questions for them to have at this point when you're having one-on-ones with them. They're starting to feel comfortable and confident if they're being utilized correctly. If they're being underutilized, they're probably starting to feel bored. So kind of keeping your finger on the pulse of that. And then culmination. So this is towards the end of so offboarding is just as important as onboarding. You want to make sure that towards the end of the internship that we always plan the final deliverables being due like a week before their end date, ideally. So they have that week to download and present and, have them give final presentations, ideally a week before they leave. So they have another week of time to create that, that what I call a breadcrumb trail. I always tell students to leave a breadcrumb trail for the next student. Document your processes, document your procedures so someone could pick up where you left off, right? Because you know that their position at your organization is temporary. But they're also really wondering in this phase about what's next for them. What's their career trajectory like? So really do a lot in this phase to reassure them. If they're on LinkedIn, give them endorsements or write them a review on LinkedIn, offer to write them just a letter to have, or, assure them that they could always reach out to you, even if it's, a lot of times they're nervous. I always tell them, I don't care if you even talk to me in 10 years, call me. I'm always happy to give you a reference. You never lose this experience from your resume. So just a lot of reassurance and a lot of pride. Sometimes they're sad to leave, and sometimes they're relieved that it's over. So that's kind of a lot of what they're going through emotionally. And I think that's just really good to understand throughout the process. So that is it. I'm going to stop sharing. We are right at time. So I'm going to follow up and send you all some materials. Thank you so much for your time and attention today. We'll definitely send out that application frame. We'll send out the slides from today and things like that. So thank you so much and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.